Welcome to another edition of Bury Your Bookie, a Peel Yourself Off the Mat Monday edition of the program. I'm Jeff DeForrest. Very happy to have you guys with us. We'll examine many things here on this occasion as the committee has spoken. And we'll take a look at who, if anybody, has a legitimate case to say that they got hosed in the aftermath of the selection committee's decision. Also, overtime is often an ugly word to the degenerate sports bettor, especially in pro football with this Meshuggah rule where you can score a touchdown at the beginning of overtime with the first possession in the regular season, but not in the postseason. And that automatically ends the game. It happened to me yesterday as I got touched up with the Jets getting 6 points here. You're backing an underdog. It looks like a very promising thing. You think you're about to cash. The last thing on earth you need is for the game to go into overtime. All of a sudden, a 2-point conversion takes place. That sets it up. The Jets ended up taking the lead late in the ball game, give up a long kickoff return on the ensuing play, and just enough to get the Dolphins into a position to kick a long field goal to send the game into overtime. And immediately you're sensing, I'm about to get fucked. Now, that ended up being a push, but I'm not sure that it is as satisfying or even the equivalent of kissing your sister. Overtime is kind of like hearing the words I do come back to you at the altar with the woman that you imagine was the girl of your dreams, but in reality, it's just going to turn out to be 10 years of turmoil and pain, ending in a very costly settlement at the end of the relationship. And Tales of the Phantom Plunger. Well, we'll get into that a little bit also on the program today. So many things to review. Our guys had a pretty good week, and we'll set you up for the week ahead. Also have a Monday Night Football game. And if you are betting, you have to do it with a reliable source. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform, your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, college football, which we have the bowl games coming up, and the college football championship, and basketball, college basketball going strong, the NHL, UFC, a lot of big boxing matches on tap. Head to BetOnline today, and don't forget, use the promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, did anybody get hosed? Well, we've been talking about this. It seems like this narrative was never ending during the course of the regular season in college football, and now we have the bowl games coming up, and there are a zillion of those, although of what significance some of them might be is under question at this point in time, as you don't have the same speculation and or enthusiasm for many of the lesser balls that you would have had in past years. So you do have the playoff games going, and they're going to be at home sites of the higher seeds in the first round. So not impacting the early bowl sessions. SMU gets in. They rally in the second half. Had a chance to beat Clemson. Clemson kicks a long, improbable field goal. What, a 56-yarder by some kid who was a phenom in high school. And they pulled the game out by 3 points. That buried a couple of our guys who liked SMU. SMU was only getting 2.5. So once again, that hook, what was like a dagger right in your back. And under consideration are three teams, essentially, although I don't know how much credence you can give to the idea that the University of Miami, our hometown school here, had any chance at 10-2 to make it into the final round of 12 for the college football playoff. And there's a lot of debate about that around this city, known essentially, it's more like an area known as South Florida. And there's a mixed bag of opinions as to whether or not the Miami Hurricanes deserve to be in the postseason. With their 10-2 record, their only losses to two credible teams, a 9-3 Syracuse team at the end of the year by 4 points. Again, a bonehead decision by Mario Cristobal cost them any chance that they had of winning that particular ball game. And then they lost to Georgia Tech, which distinguished itself pretty well right out of the chute in Ireland, beginning of the season, with what we thought was going to be a very good Florida State team. Turned out they weren't shit. But that victory was impressive to start the season when they won the season opener in week sub-0 and then came back and battled Georgia tooth and nail. Georgia eventually evolving into being the SEC champion. So the two losses, not necessarily those that you would look at and say, my God, it's not like Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois, although they crushed everybody like a grape. It was like the clubbing of seals from that point on. So the big discussion seemed to center around Alabama, which we have labeled as a team that benefits, even though he's not there anymore, from Saban metrics. And also the SEC bias that seems to be in play. I'm not sure that it's unjustified. The SEC, these teams knock each other off as a matter of routine, and they beat each other up, and they're a high caliber and quality opponents. So pretty much throughout the league, you do have your stiffs like you do in any conference, especially with the expansion of conferences to so many teams. But you could make a case that Alabama's 9-3 was more impressive than SMU's 10-2. They lost to Boise State, and they lost a nail biter to Clemson there in the championship game. The ugly message that would have been sent by the playoff committee would be that it would be better off if SMU had been left out, especially after rallying. If they got killed in that game, as it looked like the game was going in the first half with Clemson dominating, if that had sustained itself through the second half, then you probably would have seen Alabama in the postseason. But since that was not the case, and SMU rallied and had a chance to win the game, they deferred to SMU and knocked Alabama with its 3 losses out of the picture. Alabama's loss to Oklahoma at the end of the season was a disgrace. You would have thought, if anything, that they were going to go by style points like the committee did last year. And who's on this committee, by the way? Is Condoleezza Rice still a part of it? I don't know. But the decision-making reminds me very much of the World Boxing Council rankings from many years ago. Mentioned this a few times. I was very close to a fighter out in California. Covered a lot of boxing at the Olympic Auditorium. Used to see these guys that put local kids in there. It was always a Mexican-American against a guy from Mexico. The crowd was evenly divided. It was a sensational atmosphere. And yet you would see guys that were fighting regularly and we're in a position. This happened to be a friend of mine. He's the number 1 ranked contender in the WBC bantamweight rankings for the better part of a year, like 364 days of the 365. So they're going to have to go ahead and put him in a title fight against, at the time, maybe one of the greatest of all time, and certainly a boxing Hall of Famer, the great Carlos Zarate, who at that time was 51-0 with 50 knockouts. My friend Albert Davila, well deserving of the title shot, had been defeating quality contenders on a steady basis throughout that year. And at the last second, with 1 day to go before the mandatory title defense had to be issued, the administration of the World Boxing Council, which essentially was Jose Sulaiman, the senior Jose Sulaiman, and he makes Alfonso Zamora, another Mexican fighter, the number 1 contender, even though he hadn't fought in 2 years. And that same principle seemed to be in play for Alabama. Certainly it was last year when they had the 1 loss and Florida State got absolutely fucked. Met every criteria that you would look at to qualify for the, at that time, 4-team postseason field college football playoff, including, and I think this is even more impressive, because they factored in the style points because Jordan Travis was injured. And so Florida State was going to go without its star quarterback. Their backup quarterback was also injured. And they beat Louisville in the ACC championship game with a 3rd-string quarterback, but I don't think anybody would argue that it was absolutely ugly. So sure enough, they go ahead and bypass them for a 1-loss Alabama team. Why? Because Nick Saban is the coach of Alabama. It was ugly. It was a bad message. You meet every criteria, every tenet of what had been outlined as the qualifications and the qualities you need to make it into the postseason, go undefeated, win your conference championship, and even do it with a 3rd-string quarterback. And instead of rewarding that, the committee turned its back on Florida State, and it was just an ugly statement, very much like my buddy Albert missing out on his chance there many years ago to get a shot at the WBC Bantamweight Championship, which he eventually won, and Zamora actually won that fight, even though they literally dug him up out of a German graveyard. So did anybody get hosed here? I'm not sure. I think SMU was deserving. 2 ACC teams get in, and I think it would have been impossible for them to justify bypassing SMU after the showing they had against Clemson to put Alabama into the postseason. But we thought that might be the case. The University of Miami ends up in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, and what a disaster that is. An interesting stat. They ran Manny Diaz, who's now had success at Duke. They ran this guy out of town after 3 years at the helm as the coach of the University of Miami. He's still trying to recapture glory that has been long gone for the last almost 20 years. The Hurricanes have been staggering, trying to find their way back into those decades of dominance that they enjoyed from the early 1980s all the way through the early 2000s. It has not been the same. They've been through a litany of coaches. All kinds of crazy people have had the job. Randy Shannon, Al Golden, who really seemed like a used car salesman when he was coaching here. He actually looked the part. You could have seen him doing ads for Al Golden Chevrolet. And then they settled finally after they ran Diaz out of town on Mario Cristobal. Interestingly, Cristobal, who is heralded as this great coach, has one more win in his 3 years here than Manny Diaz had, in spite of going 10-2 this year against a cupcake schedule that included virtually nobody, certainly out of conference. And by arbitrary luck, they managed to dodge virtually all of the people that were good in the ACC this year. And so they accumulated this great record. And they end up now in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, but I don't know that you can really cry for them. So I think justice probably was served. Eliminated Alabama. Now those gap-toothed hillbillies that are eating roadkill and running around in coonskin caps and heralding the legend that was created there by Nick Saban, wearing their old Joe Namath jerseys. They might be upset, but I don't know that there's really any justification for that. So we do have the field in place now for the college football playoffs, and Arizona State got in by dominating their conference championship game. They were picked for last this year. So interesting field, kind of wide open. Oregon was impressive. Well, we had a couple of guys that were on Oregon this past week. So if you played their selections, so you came out with a profit, and that turned out very well. So I think overall, and even as recently as Sunday morning, I believe I saw a number there that Alabama had like a 72% chance to make it into the field, and SMU was accorded a 28% shot. So then that was quite a turnaround and a startlingly good move, I think, made by the College Football Playoff Committee, and sets up some great matchups that we'll get into as these games approach. And of course, we'll have all kinds of selections coming for you on the variety of bowl games. But they're almost impossible to judge. I mean, think about this. I mentioned that Miami is going into Pop-Tarts Bowl against Iowa State, the team that lost to Arizona State, and has a very impressive resume at 10-2 as well. And who's going to play? I mean, if the Miami Hurricanes are in there without Cam Ward, and I can't imagine that he would step foot on the field. There's a history there. We had a guy many years ago that got injured. He was ticketed to be a first-round pick, a surefire first-round pick, running back named Melvin Bratton, who eventually did make his way into the NFL, but was never the same after that. And at that time, you didn't have people. It would have been absurd to consider staying out of a ball game for your school, but and for your college football team. So he plays, gets injured, I believe it was in the Orange Bowl game that year, and was never the same player, drops down to a third-round pick, loses a lot of money, and never established himself as the force that he was in college again. That being said, we've seen more and more defections, guys that are going to be first-round picks in the pros or even have a chance to be drafted in the pros say, hell no, I won't go, as if they were protesting the Vietnam War back in the late 60s, early 70s. And so I can't imagine that Cam Ward is going to set foot on the field. The only contingency that might see that come about, and I'm not sure, it's interesting to think that college football players now have to negotiate various clauses into their NIL deals. And the only thing I think that could compel him to play would be if his NIL money, which is substantial, because he was acquired by the University of Miami in a bidding war. And I'm not sure what the actual number is. You hear all kinds of inflated figures on this sort of thing, but probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 to $6 million, as he was buying all of his offensive linemen very exotic and expensive jewelry that had to come at a high price. But for him to risk anything from his pro career by going in the Pop-Tarts Bowl in Orlando, Florida, against Iowa State would definitely be an absurdity. So you have to be careful if you're betting these bowl games, because you have to heavily take into consideration who, if anybody, of any significance is actually going to play if they're not playing for the national championship and among the 12-team field that's out there for the college football playoff system. So that'll be an interesting development. The field now set with the 12 teams, somewhat wide open, although the way Oregon performed in their conference championship game would make you feel like they have a pretty good shot as the chalk to go all the way. But we'll examine all the possibilities, getting some pretty good prices on teams that may be considered long shots, but nonetheless, you have to consider that they're possibly in there with a chance. So that was very exciting. Over the weekend, the conclusion of the college football season and all of the speculation as to what might happen finally came to an end. And we're going to have that decision coming up very quickly as to who emerges as you have the opening round with the 8 teams vying for a chance to play the awaiting by teams that were seeded in as being the best of the 4 conference championship teams that made it into the tournament. Really, really good stuff happening there. All right, overtime. Wow, it can be a curse, huh? It happened in 2 games for me yesterday. One, I ended up with a push, and one, thank God, speaking of a push, and there was a hand that got on the possible game-tying field goal by Guy Gano, who came onto the field with a chance to tie the Giants game. I'm getting 5 points with the Giants. And this is the interesting thing about being a degenerate, and one of the entertaining parts about doing a show like this, because at what point do you have your entire allegiance become diametrically opposed to everything that you've felt in your entire lifetime? As the Giants trailing by 3 against the New Orleans Saints, surprisingly, very much in this ball game, have the ball and they're looking like they have a chance to go in for the game-winning touchdown, which would have been fine, getting 5 points. But what is the last thing that you want to see happen? Overtime. It's an ugly word. In the Dolphins game against the Jets, the overtime results in a push in a game that it looked like you had won on any number of occasions, as the Jets outscored the Dolphins 10-0 in the third quarter to take the lead. They lead by 8 points in the fourth quarter at one stage. The Dolphins come back, get a touchdown, and then get the 2-point conversion, so they tie the game. Jets roll right down the field, and with little time left on the clock, end up getting what appears to be a game-winning field goal. Yes, not only do you cover, but you're going to win on the money line, only to see the Dolphins take it back, get a long field goal from Jason Sanders, tie the game, and then you have to deal with overtime, which still one of the most absurd rules I've seen in all of sports is the differential between the regular season and the postseason, where a team wins the coin flip. This rule was instituted when they changed the rule in the NFL. Come on, Raj, give us a fucking break here. The idea that the coin flip should be such a significant factor in determining the outcome of the game when the game's already been played. They already finished it off in regulation. And so the Dolphins win the coin flip. They take the ball. They march it right down the field, 70 yards, ball game over. You end up with a push, and very unfortunate because that was as deflating a draw as you could possibly achieve. Now, if you were getting 6 on a hook, you have a whole different feeling about it because you knew you were a cinch going in. It was like having the 2 teams in a highlight playoff point back in the day, and you were in a lock situation. But this turned out to be ugly. And then you have to turn your allegiance around. And as the Giants are lining up for the field goal, in this case, a touchdown in overtime to start the period by the New Orleans Saints ruins you. A game that you've hung tough the entire time. You've gone through all the agony and all the anxiety and all the agita that goes into rooting for a team to stay within the spread that's god-awful all season long and going nowhere. And now you have to sweat out, schwitz out the whole thing in the OT period. So if anything, you're hoping beyond hope that you can avoid that. And sure enough, Gano gets the field goal blocked. Saints win, and even if you were a diehard Giants fan, which I'm not, by the way, but did grow up in New York, so a little more of an affinity there. I love the city of New Orleans, but getting 5 with the Giants, the last thing you wanted to see was OT, and so you don't even mind. It's like you're happy that they lost because at least you didn't have to sweat that out. Speaking of which, the biggest bet, one of the biggest bets ever made, documented bets in the regular season, was laid out by a guy, and you talk about sweating it out. This guy probably needed a Dilaudid drip that included more opioids than you could find at the Mayo Clinic, as he laid $3.1 million on the Philadelphia Eagles on the money line, essentially laying 6-1 in that prop as they took on the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers, I think, were anywhere between a 12 and a 14-point underdog, but Carolina has kind of distinguished itself a little bit of late and come back and played some reasonably decent football. I think it's been redemption for Bryce Young, who was deemed to be on our all Dolly Parton team, as we call it, one of the bigger busts that you've ever seen as a number 1 pick. He might have even gotten Jamarcus Russell off the hook, and that guy did nothing. My God, it was like when in the NBA, Chris Washburn was drafted 3rd overall, and you thought this guy is snorting cocaine rails that are thicker than the foul line. or the baseline for that matter, and is unlikely to achieve the level of excellence that you would assume would be commensurate with being the number 3 pick overall. Bryce Young seems like a decent guy. Didn't really look like he almost looked like completely lost. And as a smallish quarterback who was having zero success, they benched him early in the year, and they actually won a game or came close to winning a game after that, covered a spread. They have achieved a couple of wins since then, and they're getting double digits in the NFL. Always worth taking a sniff at. And so here, this guy just plays the money line. He just needs Philadelphia, winners of 8 straight, and looking like they're in the conversation with 2 other teams as the best in the NFL. And he just needs them to win. They're trailing in the fourth quarter of this game. They come back. They finally seem to get the guy off the hook there. His 3.1 million not going into the pockets of the bookmakers. And here comes Bryce Young out of the end zone. Looks like he's going to get sacked by 4 different guys as he's in the end zone for a safety to end the game. He fires the ball down the field, completes a 30-yard pass. Then it appears he's hit on what would be the game-winning touchdown. And this guy, right, there was, many years ago, a guy out at Santa Anita, and one of my favorite racing handicappers was a gentleman referred to as the Professor, Gordon Jones. He wrote for the old, now extinct and defunct L.A. Herald-Examiner. And he loved it when this guy showed up that was deemed to be the Phantom Plunger. Nobody knew who he was. It was a complete mystery, but he used to show up, and when certain cinch opportunities, be like Secretariat going into Belmont, and you bet substantial amounts of money to show on this horse. Now, it has to pay by state law an automatic 5 cents on the dollar. So you're getting $2.10 back. There are occasions where these situations arise, and the track eliminates show betting, so you don't even have that opportunity. But this guy used to put $100,000 right into the show pool on horses that appear to have lock situations. They'd go off at odds of 1 to 9, and I'll never forget the day what we saw the money go in there. There would be a buzz all around the track, spearheaded by Gordon Jones, who was always in the press box there. And you could see the $100,000 go into the show pool on a horse called Lemhi Gold, who was trained by Laz Barrera. And I happened to be out at the track that day, as I was most every day, doing various media coverages. And it's a 5-horse field. Lemhi Gold is going after winning in his debut a stakes race in track record time, near track record time. I think he popped like a 107-4 for 6 furlongs in his initial appearance. Debuted in a stakes race, and now he's running his second race of his life. 5-horse field, and the guy throws the $100,000 into the show pool. Sure enough, he gets off to a sluggish start in a rain-soaked day in Southern California. And the track is sloppy, so not necessarily conducive to Lemhi Gold making a big comeback. The horse surges in the stretch and ends up out of the 5 horses in a 4-way shake for the win. A 4-horse photo for the win, noses on the wire, ends up 4th, and this guy loses the $100,000. And I thought, wow, I mean, he would have to win the Phantom Plunger. He'd have to win his next 20 bets just to get even if he continued to go and wager in that pattern. I don't know what the status is of this guy that had the $3.1 million on the Philadelphia Eagles, but he had to be absolutely dying. I mean, he must have been on a respirator by the time that drive ended, because it looked like Bryce Young had thrown the game-winning touchdown pass. It was going to be very little time on the clock, and Panthers were going to be ahead in the ball game by 1 point if this pass had been ruled a completion. It was bobbled. It was the right call. Guy was wide open, but the ball did hit the ground. And I don't know if you heard some guy, I would imagine no matter what state or city this guy was in, wherever you are, even if you were 3,000 miles away, you could have heard this guy as that pass looked like it was completed yelling, "Fuck!" Because, wow, what a way to lose. I mean, 50 ways to lose your money. That's a certainty. And that would have been an ugly fashion. But that was something that created a lot of buzz around the betting world there. $3.1 million by what appeared to be some form of Phantom Plunger there in on the Philadelphia Eagles. So, yeah, I mean, I don't have that kind of money, and I certainly wouldn't have that level of insanity to try and win. He ended up winning $500,000, so maybe he's a happy guy today while I'm sitting here trying to figure out what my next move is to sustain the lifestyle that I've become accustomed to as an older guy here, trying to make my way through what used to be the poor man's paradise, South Florida, but now has become a little bit of an elevated expense, as have every place around the country, or as every place around the country, in terms of cost of living. It's going to be great too when these tariffs kick in, and you're paying $8 for an avocado. All you people out there in California, can you imagine? Go to the store, used to be like three for a quarter. Now going to be like $8, $9 a piece. Yeah, the guys did well this past week. It was great. The professor, who's been having a god awful season, very uncharacteristic, and has been losing for us every week, or sustaining a good week was like 2-2, but he bounced back nicely. Went 3-1 this past week, and Mike Jones, our man Mike Jones, also with a 3-1 week. Scotty M got touched up a little bit, and Troy West, his usual contribution of 2-1. So you're making money if you're betting our guys, and we'll have them featured for you all throughout the week. Scotty M joins us tomorrow. We'll have Troy West on Wednesday, Mike Jones on Thursday, and the professor now bouncing back. Watch out. I think he's going to be very dangerous now that we're in the bowl season and the postseason. But as I said, almost impossible to interpret what's going to happen in these bowl games. Do your research, people, because you have to figure out who's in and who's out. You're going to have certain teams. It's kind of like the old Hawaii Bowl used to be, where if you had any kind of inside information as to which team was actually taking the game seriously, you were in a position to make a tremendous score. You would have one team that would show up looking like they had just gotten a pregame speech from Dan Campbell, or that Jackie Sherrill had gone ahead and gelded a cow to inspire his team to play. And they're all business. And the other team is there with like a lampshade on their head, and they're wearing the Hawaiian leis, and it looked like they're all disheveled, like they'd been out on an all-night bender the night before there. You're seeing their quarterback diving off the third story of the hotel that the team's staying in and trying to make his way into the swimming pool, not taking the game seriously at all. And usually you had blowouts in those games. So I think that Hawaii Bowl syndrome is going to be very much a factor in handicapping these other bowl games, as you have to do your best research to try and acquire information as to which team is actually involved, and just from a personnel standpoint, never mind attitude, but try to figure out who the hell is going to be playing in these bowl games, which kick off pretty soon, right? Coming up this weekend, you already have a few of the smaller weenie bowls with games happening on Saturday, and then again all day long, actually, on the Saturday, Sunday games, and even Monday games happening in the bowl season as we get into celebrating the holidays. So lots of interesting stuff. You do have a Monday Night Football game tonight. Well, we've been okay on this, as I've been giving you my picks, always with a lot of trepidation. And the forewarning that, let's face it, this is some treacherous turf that we're sliding down here. But you do have the Bengals, an interesting matchup from a betting standpoint. Bengals laying 5.5 against the Cowboys. Cowboys are at home. The Cowboys have won a couple in a row. Mike McCarthy seems to be feeling fairly secure that he'll probably be back as the head coach of the team. Some wild speculation that it might be Belichick. I don't know that dynamic would work. Belichick interviewing for the North Carolina job that was vacated there, as I don't know that I was by choice, by Mac Jones, a venerable coach with a tremendous resume and track record, but not good enough to satisfy the fans of the Tar Heels. So he's out. And North Carolina looking for a new head coach. Belichick apparently has interviewed a couple of times, and there's been mutual admiration, as you might expect. North Carolina thanking him for his interest and seemingly keeping him in the mix. And Belichick apparently possibly serious. I didn't see that coming. I thought surely if he ended up coming back to coaching again, it would be a pro job somewhere, maybe even the New York Giants, with Daboll staggering this year. And North Carolina looms as somewhat of a possibility. But I don't know. You guys are all betting people out there. Would you bet that Bill Belichick ends up as a head coach of North Carolina? I'm going to say, for some reason, no to that. And with the Monday night games, we've been very tepid about it, but we have been hitting them. My initial inclination would be to go ahead and lay the 5 and a hook with the Bengals. I think one of our handicappers was all over that. I don't think Dallas is really a very good team. Yeah, they managed to win in a couple of spots when they were going against really lesser and compromised opponents. Can they sustain that at home? They've been horrible at home this year. They did win on Thanksgiving Day, but other than that, really been bad. I mean, and that what was a complete break with tradition, as they've normally been dynamite at home. But the Bengals, their season pretty much up in smoke. They can't win 10 games this year. I guess, I don't know. They still have a shot to win 10. But the Bengals have been a bitter disappointment all year long. Their offensive line problems, much like our Miami Dolphins here, they haven't been able to figure them out for the last 20 years. Joe Burrow's running for his life. It's Ben Gazzara time. But the offense of the Bengals, I think, has enough firepower to overcome anything that Cooper Rush can do. So I believe that they're just going to put enough points on the board in this one to prevail by at least a touchdown. So I'd be inclined to go ahead and lay the 5.5 against the Cowboys in this spot. And hopefully it'll be an entertaining game, because I think if you don't have a lot of money on this game, or even if you don't have a small wager in this game, probably would be a pass-through. Maybe it's the night that you actually spend with the person that you're in a relationship with and say, hey, you know what? We never really go out anymore. Why don't we go out tonight? You mean you're not going to watch football? But, maybe that is preposterous. What am I proposing here? But I'm going to go ahead and lay the 5.5 with the Bengals tonight, and figure that they have enough offense to overcome anything that the Cowboys and Cooper Rush are capable of doing. All right, we will have Scotty M with you tomorrow, and a lot of stuff to get into. Here is once again, as Bet Online, the people are telling you, there's so much action. So many prop bets that you can make, all kinds of different things that you can wager on. So we'll try and find you some kind of path to the riches that you need. There's nothing like making a big score before the Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's Eve holidays, and being able to go out there and celebrate in wild, unabashed fashion, and just have a great time. Yeah, I'll pick up the check. Don't worry about it. I got everything. So we'll try and get some kind of a formula for you to make some money coming up over the next couple of weeks. And we'll get whatever research done that we can to see who's playing and who's not in these bowl games. So stick with us throughout the week on Bury Your Bookie. Great being with you. Hope everybody had a great weekend. If you wear that Phantom Plunger, please identify yourself, because I'd love to know what kind of anxiety you went through in watching that 3.1 million at risk. Maybe the guy's just a thrill seeker. I don't know. Maybe he's fueled, like a lot of bettors are, by self-sabotage, but that had to be very precarious, you would imagine. The Harry Carey knife was out there as you watched Bryce Young throw that pass down the middle of the field to a wide-open receiver, only to see the ball barely graze the ground and be rolled in incompletion. All right, a lot of fun being with you today. Thanks so much for joining us. For the people at Bet Online, NoFilter.net, always love everything that they do for us here on the show. And Greenlight Ventures, I'm Jeff DeForrest, and we're hoping that tonight, as we lay the 5.5 with the Cincinnati Bengals, that will assist you in burying your bookie.